No spoilies! No spoilies!
In the New Testament of the Bible, the four horsemen of the apocalypse were a metaphor for the various things that would lead humanity to ruin. War, conquest, famine, and death were more a concept for the things that would bring our downfall, though if the Bible was written today, it would probably just be four dudes, each named late-stage capitalism. I haven't read any Bible stories since I was a kid, messed up a fact as it is to think children are taught from that sick and twisted book, but I always was somewhat captivated by the concept of the four horsemen that would ride to signify the end of the world. Naturally, as a gaming nerd, this led me to the likes of Darksiders, which is a series of fantastical games loosely based on the biblical apocalypse. And I have to say loosely based, because saying Darksiders takes some liberties with scripture would be as generous as describing Jeffrey Epstein as just a little bit odd. Truth be told, I couldn't get into the series before 2021, for whatever reason it just wouldn't click for me, but with the benefit of some hindsight I realised one of the major factors that was keeping me out, and with it adjusted, I can now enjoy. Well, the first one. Haven't really played the second one for more than an hour, and I don't really want to give an opinion yet, and I'd rather not talk about the third game because my doctor has warned me against engaging in any topics that would depress me further. Damn medical professionals being all caring and concerned, bunch of bastards. Still, I like the first Darksiders enough now, which is good, though apparently my former heresy is still something that the Charred Council look down upon, and for whatever reason they've stuck me with a watcher until they think I'm ready to behave myself.
Oh. I do so dread the day I'll lose my new favorite plaything. Though I must admit, I don't think you have a snowball's chance in hell of being rid of me any time soon, you blasphemous little cretin.
Still, it's nice to finally have a karaoke partner.
I've heard better renditions of I Want It That Way squeaked by castrated pigs.
Somehow that's still the nicest thing anyone's ever said about my singing, so I'll take it. Anyway, today we're hopping in my time machine to visit the year 2010 when there was still a sliver of hope for our species, although a sliver might be wishful thinking, to talk about Darksiders, or rather the War Mastered Edition because I lost my original disc eons ago. Not that it matters, War Mastered is just a remastered and basically just buffed the visuals, so I don't think anyone is going to care much. Anyway, Darksiders. Darksiders is an action-adventure game. Personally, I just like that genre classification and have done for a while because I always found it to be tremendously vague, but honestly it fits Darksiders like a satin glove. Darksiders has a lot of what I want to call video game elements, which is one of those useless sentences of mine, but when I say that, I mean it plays like someone told a dev team to make a video game, and this is what they threw together with nothing else except that phrase to go on. We've got ourselves a third-person action game with some RPG elements thrown in for good measure that also has a fair amount of platforming and puzzle solving within the environments, often requiring specific tools that you find throughout the levels, and even then those tools are fairly unremarkable. You've got your standard grappling hook and your garden variety boomerang, but you've also got a device that opens blue and orange portals, because Darksiders took one look at the very concept of subtlety, put it in a car and drove that car into a river, then shot it, like, a lot. Then burned down the river. Darksiders from a pure mechanical standpoint feels very generic and on the surface even a little bit odd. When you take command of one of the horsemen of the apocalypse, one of the harbingers of doom for the very world as we know it, the last thing you expect him to be doing is platforming around the place and solving puzzles that wouldn't look out of place in a Zelda dungeon. No, I still haven't played Zelda games, but I have seen some Ocarina of Time and some Tears of the Kingdom gameplay on YouTube a few days ago, so I'm at least 2% more cultured than I was. Of course, a lack of originality in the mechanics of a video game isn't necessarily a bad thing, so long as they're all put together well enough, and it never hurts to make sure the presentation is solid, and gratifyingly, Darksiders understood this and did a really good job. Mostly.
You can never quite seem to offer honest praise, can you?
Just gonna pretend you're not there?
No. You'll hurt my feelings.
Oh, how will I go on? I say mostly because there is one little bit that irritates me, but we'll get to that later. For now, let's look at the things the game does right, because it does quite a lot right. One of the main things the game pulls off rather nicely is its approach to environmental design, both in an aesthetic aspect and a gameplay one. You're frequently required to jump, climb and swim to traverse the levels, and as you unlock more tools over the course of the game, you can not only progress more effectively, but you can also find secrets such as chests filled with currency, items that boost your maximum HP, traits for your weapons, and one amusing case of a top hat wearing zombie. He was a fun dude. Now, a lot of the obstacles that will get in your way suffer from video game itis, in that each has one very specific tool needed to bypass it, which reminds you that you're playing a video game. The first thing, for instance, is a set of wings that you need to slow your descent when jumping so you can cross greater distances. Now that's fine, but once you unlock this, several balls of magical air will spawn at various points throughout the level to boost you higher when using the wings, so this does take my... One of the main things the game pulls off rather nicely is its approach to environmental design, both in an aesthetic aspect and a gameplay one. Line behind the shed and shoot it, because this approach ultimately does make the levels feel a lot less organic. On the one hand, I appreciate the game making it obvious what certain things do, which is partly a result of the specific nature of the tools and their associated challenges. You'll always know what you need to do when you have the tools, but on the other hand, it does feel rather distracting and in some aspects a bit lazy. A clever level designer works within the limits of their character. They don't need to clutter a gorgeous world with bollocks that makes the traversal work, because they know who the character is and what they can and can't do. War can already double jump and do this dash thing, so really the level should have been built to better utilise the things that he can do, and the wings could still be there to increase his jump distance through gliding without needing those blue orbs cluttering up the place. I don't know, I again appreciate the fact that these magical lifting testicles make it obvious what we're meant to do to progress, but on the other hand, the layout of the environments can and should be the things that are driving us forward. At the very least, go the old air vent route. It's a cliche, sure, but they fit the modern ruined city environments better than these magical skyballs do. It's a shame because the game has such a wonderful art style and highly detailed environments, so for them to be cluttered with these balls of energy, the random levitating hooks for your grappling hook to cling onto, the big stone gems that slow the passage of time, and the very specific portal-friendly surfaces, all placed exactly where they need to be for the puzzles to be solved in a way that lets the player get away with not thinking about the puzzle, which, you know, should be the point of a puzzle, but anyway, then it does undermine some of the visual oomph that the game possesses.
Well, to be fair, they couldn't just let you portal on any old random surface, because then you'd just be playing Portal, wouldn't you?
You say that as if playing Portal is a bad thing.
Oh, you're no fun. Wait, that's my job.
Oh shit. Anyway, that's what I mean when I say it feels like we're playing a video game. The opening level is particularly funny in this regard because stuff grows on the walls in exactly the right pattern for us to climb it, the city collapses as we progress to stop us going backwards, and the big demon boss throws convenient cars at us that we can pick up and toss back. It's like the developers opened volume 3 of the big book of video game bits and just highlighted several chapters of stuff to use. Still, for the most part, the levels are fun to explore, usually because the visual style of the game is utterly charming, but partly because the game does have a strong focus on puzzles, and I like puzzles. That's not to say the puzzles are insanely complex or anything, but they do have that quality where the biggest threat to them is overthinking them, which personally I like. I recommend turning off the tips as well because it makes the moments of figuring out the puzzles and their elements all the more satisfying. Though, as said above, the puzzles aren't exactly deep thinkers. A lot of the time, as soon as you recognise how you're meant to interact with the environment, you'll probably be able to breeze through it, with maybe a few exceptions being when you just don't see all the elements that you're meant to work with. The real difficulty comes from combat.
Oh, finally! Remembering that playing as War might involve some fighting, did we?
Listen, you're about to sass your way out of a Happy Meal.
Better have the toy I want.
The game employs my much beloved hack and slash approach, and the combat as a whole is presented with enough spectacle that it's entertaining to engage with, whilst also making use of a nifty combo system that you can add to as you go throughout the game. It's not a particularly advanced combo system. There aren't any combos that say make use of multiple weapons, which does feel like a bit of a missed opportunity, but I do think the system we have is fine, and there are a lot of fun combos to pull off. I also like the fact that you can pick up loose objects in the environment and yeet them at foes. That's never not fun. It's also just a surprisingly effective damage dealer, but then again, if I was in a fight and my opponent lobbed a taxi at me, I'd probably not be getting up for round 2 either. I would be willing to say that combat is a pretty good part of the game.
Don't you say it!
Mostly.
Son of a bitch.
Thing is though, the first time I played the game I did so on medium, and I have to admit the combat was so tiresome by the end for one rather significant reason. That reason being that this game takes the shit approach to increase combat difficulty and just makes all the enemies damage sponges. On medium, the starting zombies take multiple combos apiece to put down, and this isn't several minutes of engaging challenge, it's several minutes minutes of hammering a button to kill some dopes who don't warrant the effort. Thank goodness you can still utilise your finishing move to insta-kill wounded and low HP enemies, the latter of which the zombies fall into, but doing so gets you less of the standard currency, and it does take away from some of the spectacle when you see the same two finishing moves play out over and over again. This whole damage sponge thing gets a lot worse later on when larger demons become involved in the fights. They take so long to kill that it stops being fun and just starts to feel like work. A clever game raises the difficulty of its encounters by, say, changing how the AI behaves, or even just by adding a few extra enemies, because then you need to keep track of a few more baddies as you fight, and that's infinitely better game design than just dialing up the enemy health or dialing down your damage output. This time around I left the game on easy and found it was a lot more fun because I didn't need to waste ages longer than it reasonably should take hacking away at bodies until they finally felt like keeling over. It's not a challenge to just give a foe more health, it's just wasting my fucking time. And I was already tired of this approach over a decade ago. Well, at least modern games don't do this anymore. Wait, what's that footage of Saints Row 2022 doing in here? Thank the creator we could use our Wrath abilities to make combat a lot quicker, provided you've got enough Wrath to crack one off, that is. That's the yellow stuff at the top there. That's the Wrath. Though the starting ability, Blade Geyser, is by far the best one in my opinion, as it just deletes most of the mobby enemies that harass you constantly, and it deals a hefty chunk of damage versus larger enemies. It can even hit low-flying airborne foes, and it also looks pretty cool. The only other two I've ever played with are the one that turns War into stone to reduce the damage he took, and the one that set him on fire to increase his damage output, but neither are anywhere near as useful as just summoning hellish blades to rip your foes apart in one quick motion. It's the sort of system that's never left me wanting to try out the other abilities, because this one I've got is quick and it works like a charm. Generally, balance isn't something the game does well. This isn't helped by War's Chaos form, where if you do enough damage in combat, then you're allowed to transform into a damned demon prince like War was reading his Chaos Codexes again. It doesn't take long to build up your Chaos form and it splatters most enemies, but it is worth pointing out that it is very entertaining to just become a fiery demon monster and stomp everything beneath your mighty feet. And you can't do a lot of combos with it, so I can see attempts to make the mechanic a more balanced one, but even in the medium difficulty it rarely took long to activate it after I unlocked it. Another symptom of the balance issue is the fact that the bosses are all fairly straightforward. You might die the first time you face them as you need to learn the rules of the encounter, but once you realise that each boss is more of a puzzle than it is an enemy, you'll quickly figure out what needs to be done and likely breeze through the next attempt. I do like the bosses from a visual design standpoint, which is true of everything in the game, but actually fighting them is a mostly underwhelming affair, save for the final boss. Don't get me wrong, he's still pretty much a cakewalk, but the presentation and the spectacle as well as the narrative implications of everything that's going on all make the encounter generally quite entertaining. Sadly, Darksiders fell into that old trap of having boss fights that were less a test of the skills that we as players were developing over the course of our adventure, and more just empty gimmicks that had some admittedly nice wallpaper thrown over them. Hell, I've struggled against certain common enemies more than any boss this game can throw at you. I think for me though, it's the lack of satisfying feedback that can be the biggest detriment to the game's combat. Now, your sword makes lovely sounds as it slashes through the enemies, but the enemies themselves don't so much as flinch when struck by the majority of your attacks. You can buy new skills from this demon boy, such as a mighty slash that knocks enemies away or a big thrust that also knocks enemies away, which is all fun, but I just think that getting hit by a sword the size of a car should maybe at least make a dude stagger, or just wind him a little, you know?
Careful now. Some might construe your critique for hatred.
Oh, I'm sure Darksiders fans are a reasonable bunch.
Didn't you think the same of Dark Souls fans, Bloodborne fans, Warhammer fans, Overwatch fans, Call of Duty fans, Star Wars fans?
Hey, they've never had a problem with me.
You're not popular enough for them to care about you.
Harsh. Fair, but harsh. The thing is, dear viewer, despite having some harsher words to say than even I expected when I started writing the script, I do really like the game. I like the variety of combos we can unleash, I love the visual design of the enemies and the environments, I adore the storytelling, which we'll touch on in a moment. I like the game, I think it's a very good game, and it's a shame that I didn't get into it when I was younger. It does a lot that appeals to me. I enjoy killing enemies with our pre-animated instant kill moves that often rewards us with health and wrath refills. I really enjoy using the variety of tools to traverse the environments, even if I do think they could have been implemented a bit more organically. Honestly, Darksiders does hold itself together really rather well. The game adopts a tremendous art style that gives its characters all this exaggerated look which gives them so much visual personality, every enemy is richly detailed, the same is true for the environments that we explore. I said that earlier, but I'm saying it again because I still think it's true. Sure, we're mostly exploring a ruined modern day city, but with a century of time between the end of days starting and us being here now, each area has transformed into its own biome and I love it. I was a big fan of that Life After People program on the History Channel that showed the eventual decay of human society when the people were all gone, and I think Darksiders' world captured that very well in its own way. Of course, this world ended with fire raining from the sky and demons devouring people, so naturally hundreds of years later the world's ruins would reflect that traumatic end, but I say the artist did a bang-up job of making this world look utterly gorgeous. I also like the sound direction and design. The background tracks know when to become more bombastic and orchestral or when to be more subtle to better match the tone of the scene, and all the sound effects feel rather exaggerated in a way that contributes to the experience. Honestly, the presentation of this game is one of the main reasons I love it so much, and I find it does most of the heavy lifting and keeps me engaged with the game as a whole. The game is more than the sum of its parts. My critiques I feel are still valid, but it's a mark of a good game that I still want to play over and over in spite of the issues, because for me the strengths ultimately outweigh the drawbacks. I think a lot of what makes it work is the spectacle of it all, because if you took away the artistry and general presentation, then Darksiders would probably top out at a mediocre experience at best. With it though, I find we have a game that's ultimately a lot of fun to play, and a prime example of just how important a game's art style and direction can be, because when these are handled well, they can more than make up for the shortcomings of their game. The story of Darksiders is loosely inspired by the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, and I mean very loosely. Like, if you've ever received those hand-me-down clothes that are many sizes too big for you with the utterance of the phrase, "you'll grow into it," then you'll probably understand what level of loose we're working with here. We open with a creation myth that talks of the endless war between the kingdoms of heaven and hell that ended in a truce when an entity known as the Charred Council came into the picture and basically told both sides that if they kept being rowdy, then some celestial horsemen would have some words for them. Those words being stab, bang, slice, and bleh. The Council themselves represent this sense of order and have a desire to bring balance to the war-torn universe, and heaven and hell agree to play nice. This led to an era of peace between the two kingdoms, and an era where humans could develop and thrive, with the war only being allowed to recommence with the breaking of the Seven Seals, each representative of the seven deadly sins, and when humanity was basically ready for the fight. At least that's what I think was inferred here. I mean, the Council say they'll be integral to the balance one day, and that's why I drew that conclusion. I accept I may be wrong about their expectation, but I'm trying way too hard to understand the will of free rocks here, aren't I? We then cut to a modern city as the end of days begins. God, my urge to make an Ugly Americans reference here, but I bet like only 3 of you would probably get it. Angels and demons rain from the sky and fight in the streets as terrified humans flee for their safety, and I have to take a moment to say just how much I love this opening bit. You can really feel the terror and hopelessness felt by the humans as they flee from demonic nasties. As the chaos ensues, one of the horsemen arrive on the battlefield, that being our big boy War, but the only issue is this isn't actually the end of days. The other horsemen didn't ride, and this battle isn't supposed to be happening, with our trek through the falling city ending in War being crushed by a great demon as his powers are stripped away, a side effect of him riding before he was meant to. The Charred Council berates him for his actions, blaming him for starting the fight, which War knows he didn't do, and to prove his loyalty to the order of things, he asks to be sent back to Earth so he can punish the angels and demons who started the fighting, and he's had this entity called the Watcher bound to him to make sure he does what he's told. Good boy, War, do what you're told. The plot from here revolves around War going from place to place in search of a means of reaching the Destroyer, the ruler of the demons, who needs to be sent back to Hell to establish the balance. You might be asking, what about the leader of Heaven? Well, that poor fucker fell in the initial battle. Or did he? We'll get to that. After being sent back to Earth, we learn that we've been gone for about a century and all the humans have now died out and we're left to fight their zombified remains. We've been told to seek out a demon named Vulgrim, who has fallen from the Destroyer's graces and as such can be a valuable ally. We kill some goons for him and the demon gives us a tool that allows us to get these big rock guardian boys to awaken and move so that we can proceed. Another quick moment aside to quickly tell you just how much I like the design of Vulgrim. I think he's a very cool looking demon. Again, I just like the designs of pretty much everything in this game. There's so much cool stuff in here. Our next task is freeing a demon named Samael from a prison he's being held in because he's another demon who the Destroyer doesn't care for anymore, and after a fight with a warden, we free the demon and he tells us he'll help us access the Destroyer's lair if we bring him powerful demon hearts for him to feast upon. War agrees, and this leads us to seek out a cathedral where one such demon, the Bat Queen Timiat, resides, but before we can get there, War needs to evade a unit of angels led by one named Uriel, though after we steal a griffin, we're able to escape her and her goons. Once we reach the cathedral, we head inside and solve a few puzzles in some weirdly deep and intricate subterranean chambers that I don't think most cathedrals have, but this one's definitely special. But with that done, we can now fight the Bat Queen on the roof and take her heart. She does plead for her life and offers to grant War any wish he desires, but given that the only thing War wants is the balance to be restored, he listens to the Watcher, who is busy demanding that we finish her off and take her heart, so we do that instead. With the heart in our possession, we can now return to Samael with the help of Volgrim, who allows us to use his fast travel network from this point in the game, the Serpent Holes he calls them. I don't like the name of that, they're not really holes, they're more just platforms floating in a void, but you know what, I'm not his marketing team. Samael praises our works, and after taking the heart, he tells us that the Watcher is stifling our true power, and with his own powers he unlocks our Chaos form and slaps the Watcher about a bit. This was satisfying, the Watcher's a dick. What's interesting here is the first time I played the game, I realised that in combat we could use the lock-on feature to target the Watcher when he appears, which to me hinted that he was an enemy all along, which makes more sense the further we go into the story. Oh, by the way, the combat has a lock-on feature that I forgot to mention until now. Now I've mentioned it. The next heart belongs to a demon called the Griever, and we need to seek the assistance of one called the Black Hammer, who can provide us a means of breaking the blue ice crystals that both impede our progress throughout the world, as well as protecting the Griever's heart. Later it's revealed that the fabled Black Hammer is an old one named Ulfane. Sadly we don't get to learn about the old ones much here, that's more relegated to the second and third game if memory serves. This is one of my favourite sequences, as War and Ulfane start out having a bit of a scuffle, as both are particularly tough and like a good fight, but then the angels show up and interrupt this, so the two set aside this quarrel so they can have a contest to see who can kill more angels as we progress through the level. I also really like Ulfane's design. He's built like a brick shithouse that ate another larger brick shithouse. In this encounter we again see the angel Uriel, who tells War he is to blame for the state of things and holds him accountable for the death of Abaddon, the angelic top dog, and points out that she and her warriors cannot get back into heaven until the balance is restored. You might dislike her, and that's fair, but honestly I feel bad for Uriel. She lost someone that she admired at the beginning of the war, and her angels have been trapped in a cycle of fighting and dying for nearly a century. As far as she knows, it is War's fault, and now she sees what is to her mind a way out, but in truth War is innocent in all this. He was merely a pawn of a larger plot involving the angels in heaven. We're going to skip a little further in the plot now, because whilst there are some interesting enemy encounters and boss designs, not a whole lot of plot actually happens in the levels themselves. The next big event is us reuniting with our horsey, which we can ride in open areas for a speed boost, but that area isn't much to write home about. The next big story beat comes when we access the Black Throne, a mysterious spire that has an angel imprisoned within it. This is Azrael, the Angel of Death. He looks cool, I like him, and he tells us what's really happening and what set things off in the first place. See, Abaddon planned a preemptive strike against Hell and enlisted Azrael and Ulfane to help him damage the Seventh Seal enough to get everything moving without the end times truly occurring, but this plan backfired and led to him being killed in the ensuing fight. Long story short, after his death he wound up in Hell and became the Destroyer, and now seeks to conquer Heaven and Hell, which leads War to track him down and battle him to the death. Once War has killed Abaddon, the Watcher tries to kill War, because it turns out the Charred Council themselves are also corrupt. They're conniving and fearful of any one entity reaching a power, and they don't trust anyone, not even the Horsemen who serve as their enforcers, because they don't really have all that much power in the grand scheme of things. At the end of the game, War intentionally breaks the Seventh Seal to summon the other Horsemen, pissed about the revelation that the system and balance he pledged himself to was so utterly corrupt that he could only see one way to correct that, and that's to bring on the end of days for realsies. That's where the story ends, and I have to say it was a pretty interesting adventure. Now, the council and the big angel dude being corrupt probably weren't the biggest shockers for anyone, but I still really enjoyed the story beats. There are some issues, but nothing major. Mostly it's the fact that the mid-section of the game is a bit meh in terms of event and narrative. Once you've met Ulfane and done that whole bit, it's quite a while until the next truly interesting story bit happens, but it's not the worst thing in the world. As the series has grown around the first game, there may also be a few contradictions in the writing and some more convoluted elements being mixed in, but as I always say, but don't want to repeat because I always say it, so to compromise, here's one of the voices in my head to say the line.
They can't deny fun when fun was had.
Thank you, little demon.
Demon, get treat.
Demon gets treat when you bring me something to deal with our other guest.
My ears are burning.
Do you have ears?
Probably.
The point is, the story is pretty good when it all comes together. It's not enough to just yeet a demon into a pit. I like to know why I'm doing the things that I'm doing. This very easily could have been a kill all demons because demons are bastards situation. No, not you, you're great. But it wasn't just that. The game has a lot going on in its narrative, and honestly, it's probably one of my favourite aspects of the game. Tear it away, and what do we have? Well, a game that's just kind of okay. I am glad that the narrative was clearly a significant priority here, and it's part of why I think the game has such a good replay value. The sincerity of the voice performances, the general tone and atmosphere of the adventure, and the magnificent presentation all contribute to the game in a major way, and I am here for it. The thing to take away here is that whilst the gameplay of Darksiders does suffer from a few issues, even a couple of response problems at times, we ultimately end up with a really good, genuinely enjoyable video game when all the pieces slot into place. When the mechanics are examined one by one, the game might come across as unoriginal or a very middle-of-the-shelf type game, but it makes up for its shortcomings with a brilliant art style and an interesting narrative, and while some of the gameplay design choices might seem a bit odd, I can't deny that Darksiders, for all of its typical game mechanics, does have a very distinctive feeling. Honestly, Darksiders is, when you get right down to it, a pretty solid game and one I highly recommend checking out if you've missed it up until now, and now I think
You really think that's all it will take to be rid of me? You think that your sins are so easily forgiven? No, I think you'll be the council's new pet for a long
Ah, there's a good hellspawn.
Now I have snack?
Yes, little demon, now have snack.